Ready? All right, looking good. Good. Are you guys ready? Okay, good. Good morning. I'm Pete Baklinski with Campaign Life Coalition. The National March for Life began in 1998, 29 years after Canada legalized the killing of preborn children through abortion. May 14th, 1969 marks a day of infamy in our nation's history. That was the day Parliament passed a law permitting abortion on demand, ushering in a culture of death that continues to this day. Abortion is the deliberate and intentional killing of a preborn human. Since 1969, more than 4.5 million Canadian babies have been lost through abortion. That's equivalent to wiping out the entire population of Alberta. Today, over 100,000 abortions are committed every year in Canada. That's roughly 300 a day. If we held a minute of silence for every child aborted in this country, we would be silent for 10 years. Tomorrow, thousands of Canadians will gather right here on Parliament Hill to demand that our government finally end this injustice and extend legal protection to the most vulnerable members of the human family, preborn children. After the rally, these Canadians will take to the streets in a massive march for life. They will hold signs, pray, and raise their voices, not for themselves, but for those who cannot speak, the preborn. This year marks the 28th National March for Life. Our theme, protection at conception. The pro-life movement in Canada, we are millions strong, is united in calling for legal protection for every human life from its very beginning. And when does life begin? Science is clear. Life begins at the moment of conception. This theme, protection at conception, is more than a slogan. It is a call to conscience. It is a demand that Canada recognize the inalienable rights bestowed on every human being by God, starting with the most fundamental of rights, the right to life. Over 95% of biologists agree human life begins at conception. It is time for our laws to catch up with the science and protect human beings from the very first moment of their existence. It is time for Canada to embrace protection at conception. This morning, I'm joined by my colleagues from Campaign Life Coalition who will speak about the life issues facing Canada under the newly elected Liberal government led by Prime Minister Mark Carney. First, I welcome Josie Lutke, our Director of Education and Advocacy, who will address the Liberal government's new commitments to abortion expansion and in vitro fertilization. Thank you, Josie.
Thanks, Pete. Prime Minister Mark Carney presents a direct threat to every preborn human being. We had hoped that he would chart a path different from Justin Trudeau's. We had even written to him asking that he reverse the policy of his predecessor and once again allow for pro-lifers, including faithful fellow Catholics, to run for the Liberal Party as candidates. Instead, it appears that he is rejecting human equality and repeating the past mistakes of the party. He has promised to make permanent the Sexual and Reproductive Health Fund program Quote, so that there will always be funding for abortion care in Canada, with access to reproductive care protected for underserved communities, unquote. In other words, they're going to be making sure that it's more convenient for immigrant, rural, Indigenous, and other vulnerable women to kill their own offspring in the womb. They're going to be sliding wads of cash into the wallets of organizations whose primary purpose is to promote abortion, many of which already have received millions in taxpayer dollars. Groups like Action Canada for Sexual Health and Rights and National Abortion Federation Canada. Carney also promised a new program providing up to $20,000 for an IVF cycle. One of the reasons why we chose the theme Protection at Conception for the National March for Life this year is to encompass evils like in vitro fertilization. Now, many people simply know IVF as a baby-making technology, and so they may wonder why any pro-lifer could be against it. By the Canadian Fertility and Andrology Society's own admission, though, in 2023, there were 85,046 embryos that were created, but only 26,525 were actually transferred into a mother's uterus. Thousands of human embryos are being made in a lab and then just discarded, or used for research, or left perpetually frozen. This is inhumane. This is not how any human being should be treated, even those who are the youngest and smallest among us. The Liberals are also forging ahead with their plan to provide free contraception. Again, this sounds like it's a good thing, preventing unplanned pregnancies, but it will actually contribute to the destruction of human life. Many forms of contraception are abortifacient, in that one of the mechanisms by which they operate is thinning the lining of the uterus, the endometrium, such that a very young embryo cannot implant and will subsequently die. The Liberal Party's election platform does have worthwhile promises, like researching postpartum maternal health, menopause, endometriosis, maternal mortality, stillbirth, etc. We beg the new government to focus on shared priorities like these that uphold human dignity rather than undermine it. We're fully aware that banning abortion, let alone banning IVF, banning abortifacient contraception, is a monumental undertaking. But we have nothing to lose. The more entrenched in the darkness of the culture of death that we become, the brighter the light of truth shines. And so tomorrow we will unapologetically march, demanding protection at conception, no matter how difficult, no matter how daunting. Because, simply put, every human being has the right to life from the moment they come into existence at fertilization until the natural end of their lives. Next, I'd like to call up Gideon Spevik, CLC's co-youth coordinator, who will speak about new threats to our nation's sick and elderly from possible expansions to euthanasia under the Liberal government. Thank you.
Thank you, Josie. On July 26, 1976, under the Liberal government of Pierre Trudeau, out of concern for the value and dignity of all human life, the death penalty was abolished. Criminals convicted of murder could no longer be put to death. 40 years later, on June 17, 2016, under the Liberal government of Justin Trudeau, a new death penalty was instated. This time, however, it was not for criminals, but for innocent citizens. According to the courts, it is now their legal right to be killed. Execution by lethal injection was now available for those with a serious medical condition upon their supposed consent, if it was determined by the so-called experts that they were supposedly nearing death. Of course, when you are suffering in a far from adequate medical system with rationed care, and in some cases, activist healthcare providers, and penny-pinching hospital administrators cheering for death, the reality of consent is at best highly questionable. And when you mask the killing under the euphemism of maid or medical assistance in dying, consent is a farce. But the bigger problem and the more insidious evil is that Canadians are now divided into two categories: the killable and the non-killable. Doctors, nurses, hospital bureaucrats, and society at large can now justify treating people differently. If you are very sick, a burden to your family, and costing the system too much time and money, you can be propositioned with death. Your life now is deemed expendable. You are no longer worthy of all of the protections and safeguards of the law. You can be killed. The ancient divine admonition, "Thou shalt not kill," has been turned on its head. The value of humanity and the equality of humanity has been dealt a fatal blow. And then, like any cancerous tumor, this corruption within our body politic began to grow, began to metastasize. In 2021, with the number of killings multiplying year after year, the new death penalty was expanded. Anyone with any disease or disability, whether or not they were actually nearing death, could now qualify. If they felt subjectively that their suffering was intolerable and they got the doctors to sign off, they could be dispatched. Suddenly, the physically disabled have joined the killable class. Our healthcare system and society at large can now treat disabled Canadians differently. Their lives are no longer worthy of full protection according to the law. And then, next, we are told that those experiencing a mental illness, be it depression, anxiety disorder, some addictive disorder, or maybe an eating disorder, should also be considered as candidates for killing. That is what the Liberals have proposed for the next expansion of the euthanasia regime. After that, we expect to see the legal killing of sick children and youth. This has also been openly proposed. After that, those with dementia and quality of life issues, maybe even the poor, the unemployed. Maybe we will arrive at the very logical conclusion of euthanasia on demand for any reason or for no reason at all. After all, that is where we are when it comes to the matter of abortion. The preborn child may be killed through all 9 months of pregnancy, no reason necessary. So why should it be any different for us born human beings? I imagine the day, very soon here in this country, this great nation, when anyone can call up the mental health hotline and be given two options. For suicide prevention, press 1. For suicide provision, press 2. Is that really where we want to go? Is that really how Canadians value and protect the dignity and worth of every human life? Already, tens of thousands have been euthanized. In fact, death by lethal injection represents a whopping 5% of all deaths in Canada. That is 1 in 20 deaths being medical murder by medical assistance in dying. This has got to stop. We at Campaign Life Coalition, on behalf of millions of concerned Canadians, and in defense of the vulnerable, the sick, and the disabled, we are here to speak up at the National March for Life. We demand an end to the killing of innocent Canadians of all ages, of all medical conditions, and of all abilities and disabilities. A society that cares is not a society that kills. The laws of men must reflect and respect the higher law of God, which teaches us to love and not to kill, to treat everyone equally, and not to group people as either killable or non-killable, as we have regrettably done in this country. The death penalty of maid must be abolished. Thank you. Next, I would like to call up Ruth Robert, CLC's Atlantic Region Coordinator, who will speak about the contradiction of Prime Minister Mark Carney being a pro-abortion practicing Catholic. Thank you.
Despite being a self-professed practicing Catholic, Carney has made clear his unreserved support for what he calls a woman's right to choose. This stands in stark contrast to his leadership of the Liberal Party, which forbids the genuine expression of Catholic faith, as currently Liberal MPs remain unable to act on pro-life convictions. The contradiction between Carney's profession of faith and his political actions is clear. Whatever Carney may believe, a practicing Catholic cannot remain as the head of the Liberal Party as it stands currently, and remain in unity with the Catholic Church. Carney's contradictory claims misleads the public and endangers souls. Formal cooperation with abortion is a matter so grave that the Catechism of the Catholic Church maintains that it carries the penalty of excommunication. Any confusion on this issue must be eliminated, not only for the laity, but for those outside of the Church who should see moral consistency in her teachings. Canon 915 of the Church's Code of Canon Law instructs that those obstinately persevering in manifest grave sin are not to be admitted to Holy Communion. Consequently, we call upon the Archbishop of Ottawa Cornwall, Marcel Damphus, to honor this recognition of the Church and ensure that Carney is denied Holy Communion until such time as he has recanted his position and received the sacrament of reconciliation. It is not only the lives of children that are at risk, but the well-being of many internal souls, including Prime Minister Mark Carney's. Next, I'd like to call up Pete Beklinski, who is CLC's Communication Director. He will be speaking about threats to faith-based and pro-life charities under the new Liberal government.
Imagine arriving at your church one Sunday only to find it padlocked shut, doors barred, lights out. Your fellow worshipers scattered on the sidewalk. Sound impossible? It's not. Very quietly, 5 months ago, an all-party finance committee tabled a report in the House of Commons. Buried within its hundreds of recommendations for the 2025 federal budget were two proposals that pose a direct threat to people of faith and to Canada's pro-life movement. Recommendation 429 calls on the federal government to, quote, no longer provide charitable status to anti-abortion organizations, end quote. Recommendation 430 goes even further. It urges the government to, quote, amend the Income Tax Act to remove the privileged status of the advancement of religion as a charitable purpose, end quote. If these proposals are adopted, the consequences would be catastrophic. Churches, faith-based ministries, pro-life organizations, pregnancy care centers, and religious schools could lose their charitable status. Many could be hit with a revocation tax, a 100% tax on all assets, effectively allowing the government to seize and liquidate their property and shut them down. This is not just an attack on organizations, it's an attack on freedom, freedom of religion, freedom of conscience, freedom of expression. It is an attempt to silence those who stand for life and live out their faith in the public square. But Canadians are responding. People of faith and pro-life citizens across the country are uniting to oppose these dangerous proposals. Catholic bishops, evangelical pastors, and Christian leaders have joined together in urging the federal government to reject them outright. Our organization launched an emergency nationwide petition drive to demand that the next Prime Minister protect the charitable sector from this threat. The petition has now gathered the support of over 10,000 Canadians, and it's growing daily. Today, we call on Prime Minister Mark Carney to publicly and unequivocally reject recommendations 429 and 430. We call on the Government of Canada to uphold the right of churches and pro-life organizations to operate freely without government interference, financial penalties, or the threat of closure. Canadians must be free to believe, to speak, and to serve without fear. I'd next like to call my colleague Jack Fonseca, who is CLC's Director of Political Operations, and he will speak about the outcome of the recent federal election as it relates to the pro-life movement.
Thank you, Pete. On April 28th, Canadian pro-lifers gave a collective gut-wrenching sigh at the re-election of the Party of Death, known as the Liberal Party of Canada. And at the thought of Mark Carney, who fully supports preborn child murder, ruling over us as Prime Minister for another 2 to 4 years. Again, speaking with total candor, this is a horrifying prospect for Canadians who believe in the sanctity of human life, religious freedom, and plain old morality. To be clear, however, Campaign Life Coalition is nonpartisan. In this federal election, we did not support the Conservatives per se as a party any more than the Liberals. With respect to life issues, Pierre Poilievre mimicked Carney, holding himself out as a defender of abortion killings and even of euthanasia. Rather, our principled approach in the 2025 federal election was totally nonpartisan and based on the merit of local candidates who are accountable to their constituents, rather than whoever the party leader happens to be. We endorsed and got out the vote for individual pro-life candidates regardless of party. And as a result, we supported 56 pro-life Conservatives, of which 42 were elected as MPs, representing a 25% increase in pro-life representation in the House of Commons. That is something we can celebrate as a movement. We also endorsed 58 candidates from the People's Party of Canada, 28 from the Christian Heritage Party, 10 from the United Party of Canada, 1 from the Libertarian Party, and 1 independent. Unfortunately, none of these were elected. Now we want to look forward into the Canadian political scene. My colleague Josie has appealed to Prime Minister Mark Carney to have compassion on the children being targeted for abortion from the very time of conception. But if protecting human life from the time of conception is too big a jump for him to make all at once, I would ask him to consider at least taking a small first step into the light. Mr. Carney could do this by condemning the horrific revelation that between 2019 to 2024, at least 642 Canadian babies who survived botched abortions were born alive were either left to die or potentially even killed. These gruesome figures were uncovered by researcher Patricia Maloney with data published by the Canadian Institute for Health Information recently. Mr. Carney, will you at least meet us on the periphery by pledging a Born Alive Infant Protection Act to mandate the provision of life-saving neonatal care and medical assistance to babies who survive abortion, with prosecutions for medical staff who violate the law? According to the Criminal Code, these are murders. Now we turn to Pierre Poilievre, leader of His Majesty's loyal opposition. If Prime Minister Carney lacks the moral fortitude to address this injustice, will you pledge to introduce a Born Alive Infant Protection Act upon becoming Prime Minister? Mr. Poilievre, in closing, I would also encourage you to denounce the corrupt practice of appointing Conservative Party candidates without a nomination vote by the party's grassroots members. In the 2025 election cycle, you allowed the cancellation of at least 110 nomination contests in favor of appointing your preferred candidates. This is one of the reasons why you lost this federal election. It created resentment among grassroots members who had their right to vote for the candidate of their choice stolen. You also demotivated the hundreds of highly motivated Conservative activists who ran for the Conservative nomination and were disqualified or otherwise blocked. Mr. Poilievre, will you end this assault on party democracy? May God bless Canada. Thank you. And now I'd like to call up George Buscemi, our Quebec president.
Bonjour à tous, merci d'être ici. En cette 28e marche nationale pour la vie, nous nous rassemblons pour demander la protection de toute vie humaine dès la conception. Le thème de cette année, protection dès la conception, est une réponse claire à l'agenda pro-avortement et pro-euthanasie du nouveau gouvernement libéral dirigé par Mark Carney. Premièrement, Josie Lutke nous a expliqué que ce gouvernement s'engage à financer non seulement l'avortement de manière permanente, mais aussi à élargir l'accès à la fécondation in vitro, une pratique qui mène à la création massive d'embryons humains jetés, congelés ou détruits. Le gouvernement promet aussi la contraception gratuite, y compris des produits qui peuvent agir de manière abortive. Deuxièmement, Gideon Spivak a dénoncé l'élargissement constant de l'euthanasie au Canada. Initialement limitée aux personnes en fin de vie, elle s'étend désormais aux personnes handicapées et demain peut-être aux personnes souffrant de troubles mentaux, voire aux enfants. Le Canada a effectivement basculé dans une culture où certaines vies sont considérées comme éliminables. Troisièmement, Ruth Robert, ma collègue, a mis en lumière une contradiction grave. Le premier ministre Carney se dit catholique pratiquant, tout en appuyant sans réserve et avec fierté l'avortement. Ce scandale public met en danger les âmes et appelle à une réponse pastorale claire de l'Église, notamment à travers le respect du droit canonique. Quatrièmement, Pete Baklinski a alerté sur 2 propositions dangereuses du Comité des finances. Retirer le statut d'organisme de bienfaisance au groupe pro-vie, de 1, et 2, remettre en question le statut de charité pour les groupes religieux en général. Si ces mesures sont adoptées, cela mènera à la fermeture d'églises, de centres d'aide aux femmes enceintes et à une grave atteinte à la liberté religieuse et d'expression au Canada. Enfin, Jack Fonseca a rappelé que malgré les obstacles, le mouvement pro-vie a réussi à faire quand même élire 42 candidats aux dernières élections. Le combat continue et la vérité sur la dignité de toute vie humaine finira par triompher. En passant, le mouvement pro-vie s'étend sur tout le pays, y compris au Québec, où nous aurons le 31 mai notre 2e édition de la Marche pour la vie à Québec. L'année passée, nous étions entre 1000 et 1500. Et cette année, nous espérons encore plus. Nous allons avoir un souper bénéfice comme ils ont ici à Ottawa. Et nous avons une participation accrue d'autres institutions. Et donc, nous sommes heureux de vous accueillir à cette marche également. À tous les participants à la marche d'Ottawa, ainsi qu'à nos militants et bienfaiteurs, nous sommes un mouvement enraciné dans la vérité, la charité et la justice. Et nous ne cesserons jamais de défendre ceux qui ne peuvent se défendre eux-mêmes. Merci de vous tenir debout avec nous et merci à vous tous de nous avoir écoutés aujourd'hui. À présent, je vais inviter mon collègue Pete Baklinski pour venir faire des conclusions, des remarques de conclusion et ensuite répondre à vos questions. Merci. So now I'm going to invite Pete Baklinski to answer some questions after making some concluding remarks. Thank you.
My friends, the pro-life movement here in Canada is here to stay. We will never give up. We will never back down. We will not rest until every human life is protected from the moment of conception onward. We look ahead to a day when the right to life becomes the defining issue in Canada, when elections are won or lost on whether a candidate defends the most vulnerable among us. The day must come, and it will come, because a nation cannot endure forever while denying justice to its own children in the womb. History shows us that injustice never has the final word, not in any of the great human rights struggles. In the end, truth triumphs, injustice falls, and in the end, life will win. We believe in a future of Canada that is pro-life, and we will live to see a day when life is protected at conception. Friends, tomorrow is the great National March for Life. We will meet on the Hill at 12:30. The march begins at 1:30. After marching, participants will return back here to the Hill for testimonies from women who have had abortions and now regret it. And there will be songs on the Hill, life-affirming songs. We are here not just to mourn those who have been lost to abortion, but to also celebrate life and to celebrate the future that will one day be our country. Thank you for coming to today's press conference. We'll now have a time of questions, and any of the speakers are invited to come up if there are any questions for them. So yes.
So Ellen Buzetti, maybe you said it, but I didn't hear everything today. So
Please come up a little bit closer.
there you go. I think somebody said 42 MPs, pro-life MPs were elected.
Yes.
Okay. Is that an increase or a decrease? Are there new MPs out of that?
Yes, so the question is, at the last federal election, 42 MPs were elected who are pro-life. Is that an increase or a decrease? The good news is that this federal election we saw an increase of 6 pro-life MPs who were elected, plus the re-election of all incumbent pro-life MPs. So there was not one single pro-life MP that we greenlit with our rating system that lost their seat, and we gained 6 additional seats for a total of 42.
Okay, thank you very much. And my follow-up is that tomorrow is the march, and as far as I can remember, it's probably the first time the march takes place while Parliament is not sitting. Maybe my memory serves me wrong, but does that change anything? Will you have MPs showing up anyway?
Right. Does anyone want to address that question? Jack? Where's Jack? Do you want to address that question about Parliament not being in session, and how does that affect the march, and are we going to have MPs show up or not? Like, what's the political situation?
Yeah, it doesn't affect the march at all in terms of the purpose of the march. We're still sending a message to parliamentarians, and I'm sure they will receive the message whether they're in the building or not. But we're really energizing the movement. We're bringing Canadians, young and old, from across the country here to join us at the steps of Parliament Hill and to launch them out again into their communities to demand legal protection for children in the womb. And so that movement is still growing, and in that respect it doesn't affect it. We do expect, however, some pro-life MPs to come and represent during the rally tomorrow.
And if I can follow up on that, in the past we had seen the Conservative leader not allowing his MPs to show up or just have one of them. Do you feel the same situation this year?
Matt, would you like to address that, or do you want me to? Okay. Well, we've invited the chair of the pro-life caucus, Arnold Viersen, and it's up to him if he's going to invite some other pro-life MPs to come along with him. So we leave that in his capable hands, but we do expect that Arnold Viersen, the chair of the pro-life caucus, will be there. And whether the leader is putting pressure on MPs not to come, that's possible. He is pro-abortion after all. But we hope that's not the case. Hopefully he respects party democracy and the democratic rights of members of parliament to express the values of their constituents and what they believe in good conscience is true and correct.
All right, that concludes our press conference. Thank you very much for coming. Good job, guys.